Thanks for having me.
So, Scott, last time you were here, I feel like every time you're here, in between that time, there are a lot of things that happen in reference to foreign policy. So, a lot has happened since you were here last time. I guess I want to start with Ukraine. So recently, the Senate just passed the $95 billion bill for foreign aid, which includes Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. In reference to Ukraine, the big question I think a lot of people have is why, again, are we giving more money to Ukraine when it's very clear to those of us that have been paying attention that this war with Ukraine is already over, that obviously that Ukraine is not going to beat Russia, but here we are giving them more money. I want to get your take on that. Why are we still giving Ukraine money when we know for a fact that they cannot win this battle against Russia?
Well, the fact of the matter is we never expected Ukraine to win this battle against Russia. Anybody who thought Ukraine could win this war should probably be drug tested. Although I understand in many parts of the United States it's legal to consume drugs. But you shouldn't make foreign policy decisions while under the influence of drugs. But it's never been the objective of the United States for Ukraine to beat Russia. In fact, if at the beginning of this conflict, the CIA briefed the president, 3-day war. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff anticipated the war to be over in a week. Nobody expected that Ukraine was going to outlast Russia. It wasn't until people misconstrued the Russian objectives in this. Russia called it a special military operation. And of course, we in the West, because we're overly politicized, says, no, it's an invasion. No, if it had been an invasion, it would have been over in 3 days or a week. It was a special military operation because Russia didn't want to defeat Ukraine. What Russia wanted was to get Ukraine to do that which the West wouldn't allow it to do, which is to say, we're going to be neutral, we're not going to join NATO, Crimea is cool, and we're not going to persecute the Russians of the Donbass. How do we know that? Because that's exactly what Russia did. Russia went in there in less than a week. Once they moved down to Kiev, once they took over large portions of Ukraine, Russia said, hey, let's go to the negotiating table. And the Ukrainian government looked around and said, yeah, we really don't have a choice at this point in time. So they went. 6 rounds, finished up with something called the Istanbul Communique, which was this peace agreement. And I mean, in respect, at first, if you had told me about this without at the time, you said, this is what the Russians agreed to, I said, well, Russia must have lost the war because they gave everything to Ukraine. They just said, you can't be a member of NATO. Then they also said, Crimea is ours. But they said on the Donbass, it's not going to be yours, but there's going to be a referendum. We can't give the Donbass back to you because of the way you've abused the Russian people. But you change your constitution, you get everything back. Not only that, out of good faith, we're going to voluntarily withdraw our army from Kiev, from Chernihiv, from Sumy. We reduced our forces in Kharkiv by 50%. We're serious about this. We want peace. Oh, even though we said you can't join NATO, and this is the one that killed me, Article 5 protection will allow you to sign security guarantees with all of NATO. They give you Article 5 protection for everything but Crimea and the Donbass. Meaning that if we come in and we attack you here, it's like you're a member of NATO. They get to come in and protect you by law, by treaty. And I'm just going, that's insane. Why would Russia ever do that? Because Russia didn't want a war. Russia did everything possible to stop this war. But once it became clear, when Russia pulled back and did this, the West misconstrued this as a sign of weakness. And that's when they told the Ukrainians, don't accept the peace deal. We're going to give you $48 billion. Remember the Lend-Lease back in May of 2022? We're going to pump you full of weapons, and you guys can go and fight the Russians. But it was never, ever, and we know this because Lloyd Austin flew to Ukraine and went to Poland and said, all we want to do is hurt the Russians. What our strategic objective here is the strategic defeat of Russia, not to kick them out of Ukraine and all that, but to inflict so much harm on them that their military becomes demoralized, the people become demoralized, and they overthrow Vladimir Putin, because we were sanctioning them at the same time, trying to collapse their economy. So we were looking for Russia to collapse from within, not by the Ukrainians to beat them. Well, we misconstrued everything. We got it all wrong. Russian economy didn't collapse. The Russian army stood firm once they realized they'd been betrayed by the Ukrainians. They mobilized their defense industry. I just ran through some numbers today earlier in a conference they had. I'll just quick throw them out to your people so you understand what's going on here. Russia, when they started this conflict in 2022, had 900,000 men in their military. Russia today has 2.1 million men in their military. So for all the people that said Russia's weaker, Russia's this, Russia's that, but Russia's at 2.1 million. Now, 600,000 though are unique only to the special military operation, reservists, etc. But fully 1.5 million is a new expanded army because of the way the West has behaved. Russia today is producing about 150 tanks. That number might be up closer to 200, and it's capable of going to 300 tanks a month. 300 tanks a month. The United States can produce 33 tanks a month. Wait a minute. The United States is the greatest military power in the world. And we don't even produce 33 tanks. We refurbish 33 tanks. The Germans can do 150 tanks a year. The French can do about 50 tanks a year. The British can do about 50 tanks a year. Basically, in 2 months, Russia outproduces all of NATO in tanks. Artillery shells. We can produce around 3 million a year. The Russians can produce around 24 million a year. Yes, they outproduce us all along the line. The United States Army, 425,000 strong. In 2022, we were saying that in order to keep this strength of 425, we needed to recruit 60,000 people. They could only recruit 45,000. So in 2023, they upped it to 65,000. They only recruited 50,000. Because they didn't have the manpower, they had to shrink the army by 24,000. So the U.S. Army shrank by 24,000, while the Russian army grew by 600, 2.19, 1.2 million. So anybody who thinks the Russians are weak and all this stuff, no. Russia has turned this thing around. Russia is in the driver's seat. Ukraine today has run out of manpower. This money we gave them, it's useless. Even Jake Sullivan said, we can give them all the weapons in the world, but if they don't have men to use them, it's no good. The Ukrainians have no men left. They did an emergency mobilization order. There's nobody. Everybody's running away. Nobody wants to fight. So while Ukraine, everybody's running away from the fight, Russia is getting 40,000 volunteers a month. Now let's talk about these volunteers. These aren't just young, stupid kids. Because in America, after we do the USA thing, the vast majority of people that join are frat boys out of college and kids that, don't have a job, but they're sitting around and they're feeling a little, rough and tough, and so they join the military. The guys that join the Russian military are men in their 30s and men in their 40s. They all are well employed. They have families. So why would you leave a good-paying job in a factory, a family, a house, a mortgage, kids, when you don't have to? Remember, they're volunteers. They're not being drafted. You want to know why? Because they are patriotic. Because all of Russia has woken up to the fact that the West is at war against Russia in Ukraine, and that this is their great patriotic war. Have you ever seen that movie Patton? When George C. Scott's character, what are you going to tell your kids? Where was Grandpa in the Great War? Shoveling poop in Louisiana. Well, you don't want to tell. So the Russians don't want to say, where were you in the Great War? They don't want to say, well, I was doing information technology, or I was, doing this or that. They all want to say, hey, campaign medal. I was there. I was at the front. I was fighting for Russia. 40-year-old men who have are medically disqualified, meaning that they've gone to the recruiter, and the recruiter said, nah, you can't because you're medically disqualified. They're paying out of their own money to go get surgeries, to go get this fixed, so they can go to the recruiter and say, here, I got it fixed. Please let me join. It is a disgrace. It is dishonorable in Russia not to be volunteering for this. And if you're not volunteering for the front, we have guys who are driving. The way the Russian thing works is, they get all the stuff they need from but the war is changing. Right now, there's a lot of drones flying around. And a lot of these drones, aren't military-grade drones because they just sort of grew from the grassroots. And so they're calling home saying, get us more drones. So communities are going and buying drones from China. They're getting like 10,000 of them. Then they stuff them into armored cars, and they get volunteers to drive them to the front lines. So guys are at home, and they're saying, let's take the drones to the boys in the front. They're driving there. Every once in a while, bam, they get hit and die. So this is dangerous. All of Russia is mobilized. All of Russia is mobilized. Ukraine can't win this war. We gave the money away because we want them to kill to kill Russians. That's all this is about. And again, I just asked you, if you recall, in the summer of 2021, before the great American retreat from Afghanistan, there was a huge scandal. The Russians, it appeared, had bribed the Taliban to kill Americans, if you remember that. It never happened. It was total garbage. But all over, New York Times, and they're so mad. And when you break the story down, it came down to one report of a Taliban bomb outside of Bagram Air Base where 3 Americans died. And they said, we believe that these guys who did this got money, and they had this convoluted money trail of the Russians to kill these 3 Americans, and we want to go to war against Russia. You're not allowed to kill Americans. America just gave Ukraine $60 billion to kill as many Russians as they can. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a Russian family. What do you think about America right about now? America started this war. America turned Ukraine against Russia. America has killed over 500,000 Ukrainians because we started this war. We're responsible for the deaths of nearly 100,000 Russians because we started this war. And now we just gave them $60 billion more to kill more Russians. And so now, Scott Ritter, like the idiot he is, because I believe in peace, I'm going to go to Russia in June. I am going to Russia in June. And I'm going to travel around Russia, and I'm going to meet Russian families. And when I sit down with them, how are they going to look at me? I mean, how am I going to be able to sit down at the table with these people as an American, and they're going to go, hey, welcome to Russia, but isn't your government trying to kill our people? And what am I supposed to answer that? Oh, well, it's not me. I'm not. Well, aren't you an American citizen? Well, oh, yes, I'm very proud. Aren't you? Isn't America a democracy, representative democracy? Well, absolutely. So isn't the government held accountable to you for what they do in your name? Yes, I believe in that. So the government's killing Russians. What are you doing about it? Now, the answer is I'm here in Russia trying to make peace. But the point is, what an uncomfortable place to be. He's sitting across from Russians saying, yep, my government just gave those Nazis $60 billion to kill your husband, your father, your son. But the point is, Russia isn't going to lose this war. Ukraine isn't going to win this war. But we just keep throwing money away. $60 billion there, 20 some odd billion to the Israelis, a couple billion to Taiwan. And think of what it's about. 60.1 or 61 billion to the Ukrainians to kill Russians, 23 billion to the Israelis to commit genocide against the Palestinians, and a couple billion to the Taiwanese so they can commit suicide like the Ukrainians did and be part of a war. What does America do right? I would not be so angry. I still would be angry about the money because good Lord, just right down the road, we got crumbling infrastructure, I got homeless, we got a ghetto, we got everything, man. It could benefit from some money from the federal government to help the American people. I think the people in Flint, Michigan still have dirty water. I'm pretty sure all around the country we can point to problems that have been there for decades that could use an infusion in this capital. But I also understand that we need to promote goodwill around the world. We're supposed to be a world leader. So if we were giving the Ukrainians $60 billion to build schools, build infrastructure, do everything we're supposed to be doing here at home, at least I'd be saying, well, at least it's going to something good. So if I ever visited Ukraine, at least I could walk around with my head held high saying, hey, how'd that taxpayer money go? How you guys doing with America's money? Things are looking good? Yay, you love America because we're here to help you. We give you all the money that we need at home. If we went to the Israelis who were promoting Israeli-Palestinian rapprochement, joint education centers where the Palestinians grew up with the Israelis, where the walls came down, where communities came together, I'd go to Israel and Palestine and say, hey, how'd that money help out? You guys aren't killing each other anymore, right? Peace is breaking out all over. I'm feeling a little bit better. Yes, my bridges are still collapsing in Albany. They're still homeless, and there's problems. But at least we did something good. The same thing with Taiwan. Hey, did we help you diversify your economy more so you guys who are already the richest economy in the world? Wait a minute. The richest economy in the world who have a surplus of money, and we gave them money. Never mind. Taiwan, I'll never be happy about giving you money under any circumstance because you should be giving us money. But, we're the bankrupt nation, trillions in debt. You're the guys making all sorts of money. You make all those computer chips that make our phones and everything work. Roll some of that to us. We want a grant from Taiwan to America to make us feel better. But my point is, we're doing it to start war. All we do is have a policy based upon starting war and coercion. Right now, Blinken's in China. I'm all over the map here, but it's all related. Blinken's in China. Instead of sitting down with the Chinese and saying, hey, let's do diplomacy, why don't we talk about this? Let's see what we can do. What do you think, guys? We can avoid. We come in. If you don't do it the way we want to do it, we're going to sanction your financial institutions. And the Chinese are like, Tony, see the hand? It ain't shaking. You see you threatened that with the Russians, right? How'd that go, Tony? Europe's economy has just collapsed because you sanctioned the Russians. What do you think is going to happen if you sanction China? Oh, the American economy is going to collapse in an election year, you idiot. But that's the whole point. All we know how to do is threaten people. So there's 60, and here's the other sickening thing about this money. I think 48 billion of it rolls back to America. It doesn't go to Ukraine. It goes to American defense industry. And see, this was the selling point. And this is why I don't understand Americans didn't get it. Because everybody since said, look, this is good for the American economy. You see, 48 billion is going to come back. It's going to mean jobs, American jobs. And we're going to build weapons for America. And it's not. So you're going to extend the war in Ukraine that's already cost them 500,000 dead. You're willing to sacrifice another 100, 150, 200,000 Ukrainians for American jobs. How do you feel about that, America? Now that I told you what it's really about. All those jobs you're going to get, all that money, that Christmas bonus, it's going to be because 200,000 Ukrainian families had to put a loved one in the ground.
Yep.
Put that in your Christmas, coffee and drink it. America sucks as a country right now. And I have to tell you, the American people suck because we're letting this happen. I mean, I know there's people out there demonstrating, but not about Ukraine. There's no demonstrations about Ukraine. There are a handful of people, you and I are going to talk about it, but the American people who say we believe in things, we believe in doing the right thing, we believe in freedom. You don't believe in anything except getting rich. You don't believe in anything except getting a bigger payday. You don't believe in anything except accumulating comfort. You want the U.S. government to wrap you in a cocoon of comfort, inject you with the feel-good sauce, and you're just going to sit there and rock around and feel good. And as long as they keep doing it, it doesn't matter how they justify it. Money to Ukraine, money to Israel, money to Taiwan. You don't care. You don't. We don't care. But unfortunately, the rest of the world does. And there will come a day when America is going to find it difficult to get a seat at the table. It's like we're going to show up at the table and no one's going to get up and offer us a seat. No one's going to even turn to look at us. They're just all going to turn their back to us and ignore us, as we deserve to be ignored, because all we stand for is death and destruction. We don't stand for anything good anymore. None of the principles and values that ostensibly define us as a nation. We don't stand for any of that.
That's a really good point. Let me for just a second. That's a really good point, Scott. And I just want to ask you this question. I know you said you're going to go visit Russia in June. Are you concerned that you may be detained when you try to come back to the United States? And I'm asking just because I know that's happened to Fiorella, and I know Tara Reid is in a very troubling position right now. She is kind of stuck in Russia, went there for a book tour, and then was told by Representative Matt Gaetz that if she were to return to the United States that she would probably be detained. Are you concerned about that, or are you just kind of like, whatever, fuck them?
Well, I mean, I have a family and I have responsibilities, so the last thing I want to do is end up being detained. And this will be my third trip in a year. I went last May for a month. When I came back, I was stopped for a number of hours and questioned extensively before they returned my passport, shook my hand, and told me, welcome to America. I went again in December and January for a lengthy tour that took me through some controversial areas like the Donbass and Crimea. I gave a speech before 25,000 Chechen soldiers that got a lot of attention. So I thought for sure I was going to get some special treatment. They made me sit down for an hour, handed me my passport, shook my hand, said, welcome to America, welcome home, and sent me on my way. This trip, there's nothing controversial about it, which probably means they're going to shoot me upon arrival. But there's nothing controversial about this trip. I'm literally going, we're going to go to 16 different cities throughout. The motto of this trip is from the Pacific Ocean to the Baltic Sea and everything in between. And we are going to places that most Americans won't have heard of, and that's why we're going to expose Americans to this. We're going to meet with Russians, have town hall meetings. We're going to introduce Americans. We're reaching out to peace activists across the country to get a list of people who would like to have Russian pen pals. In each city, we're going to find Russian families, and we're going to match them up with an American family. We're going to have a satellite hookup there and let the first call be on us, put them together, let them talk, and then we're going to try and create this connectivity that needs to be happening so that people stop fearing Russia and Russians stop fearing America. There's nothing, no one could say, well, you're doing something that's against America. Really? Making friends is against America? I thought that's what we were supposed to be about. No, this trip is it's the purest kind of trip imaginable, truly designed to be people's diplomacy. We're not trying to change American policy. We don't care. I mean, we do care, but we're not there to, policy discussions. We're there to, hey, take Ivan, meet Frank. Frank, what's your wife's name? Melissa. Meet Svetlana. You got kids. Here's little Ivan, and there's little Frankie, and they're going to talk and say hi. And then at the end, after 10 minutes, we're going to go, okay, you each got the contact information? Shaka, brother, let's go. And we're going to move on to the next city, and we're going to do the same thing all over again. The idea is to break down the barriers of ignorance and fear by getting people to talk to one another. If the U.S. government wants to pull me aside and detain me for this, God bless them. I'm game. But I don't think they're going to, because I'm not, I can't speak. I don't know anything about what Tara, her situation. I trust all these people when they got pulled over that they felt afraid, and maybe they had cause to feel afraid. I don't. I'm not afraid, because in my heart of hearts, I know that there's literally no controversy here. I mean, if the U.S. government wants to make a big deal out of free speech and trying to improve people-to-people relations, that's on them, not on me. I'm not going over there trying to cut a secret deal or, open up a secret business or anything like that. I'm simply trying to make peace break out all over. I hope it succeeds, and I hope I don't get detained, but if I do, hey, to the Customs and Border Patrol guy that's listening to this right now, writing down notes saying, detain Ritter, at least, could you guys have a Diet Coke there for me? Because if you're going to hold me for a couple hours, I do get thirsty, and you're going to, I'll talk, my throat will get sore, but, come on, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But, no, I'm not worried about it.
Okay, cool. I was just checking. But I want to talk about this really quick, too, as well. Zelensky was recently on Meet the Press, right after this aid was announced. And I'm starting to notice now, even mainstream media is starting to question him a little bit more harshly about what is the plan here. So I want to play his response here, where he gets a little bit of pushback from Meet the Press.
All the others.
President Zelensky, can you give Americans a sense of the timeline? Will you still need as much aid this time next year? Or do you think you can turn the corner on Russia? What's the timeline?
Well, it depends on when we actually get weapons on the ground, as you said it, Christian. If we get it in half a year, well, we've had the process stalled for half a year, and we had losses in several directions. The losses in men, in equipment. In the East, it was very difficult, and we did lose the initiative there. Now, we have all the chance to stabilize the situation and to overtake the initiative. And that's why we need to actually have the weapon systems. When we get it, when we have it in our arms, then we do have the chance to take this initiative and to move ahead and to protect Ukraine. But giving you a specific timeline of the war, well, it depends on how soon we get this aid. There are so many variables, so many factors, and sometimes when we protect the important line, you retreat because you don't have enough forces and equipment, and then retaking that line would take 2 or 3 times more. I'm not saying that this is how it's going to end up, but things are possible, and I can give you an example with F-16.
And we'll go ahead and stop there. But I wanted you to hear that part there because it's very obvious that he was not giving her a definite answer. He doesn't really have a timeline because he knows that he cannot win this war. Even other people that are around Zelensky, it was reported last year that he is delusional. This is what people around him are saying. He's delusional and he knows there's no way. We've already lost this. What do you think is going to happen going forward? Do you see Zelensky actually sticking around and being a part of this for the next year? Or do you have a feeling that at some point Zelensky is going to take off? He's just going to run away and leave Ukraine, and Ukraine is just going to be left, to fight on its own accord?
Zelensky made a decision not to hold presidential elections or parliamentarian elections, which were supposed to take place this year. He claims that the Constitution allows him to stop elections because of a time of war. That's a interesting interpretation of the Ukrainian Constitution and an interesting interpretation of principles of democracy. For people, without getting into the nuances of the Ukrainian Constitution, Abraham Lincoln held elections in the middle of the Civil War against General McClellan. Very contested elections. Franklin Delano Roosevelt held an election in 1944, winning an unprecedented fourth term, sworn in 1945. Democracies hold elections. Winston Churchill lost an election at the end of the Second World War while he was in Potsdam negotiating with Stalin and Roosevelt about how to bring into the war. The Brits held an election. So the concept that you can't have an election in wartime is stupid. On May 20th, his term expires. And it'll be interesting to see how Ukraine treats him and how the world treats him. Russia's already said that he won't, in their eyes, he won't be the president of Ukraine. That raises another question. If he's no longer a head of state, can Russia kill him? Because Russia's pretty much said, we're not going to kill a head of state. But if he's no longer a head of state, can they kill him? I don't know. I would hope they wouldn't. I don't think we need to be in the business of knocking off political leaders. But, it doesn't matter what he thinks. I read an interesting article the other day where they said Ukraine will be able to resume the counteroffensive, the one that they did last year where everybody died. They'll be able to resume that counteroffensive by 2026. I'm like, if you think there's going to be Ukraine in 2026, you got problems. The Russians are confident that there will be major changes to the military map by May, June. They envision a collapse of the Ukraine. It's happening today. I mean, I opened up all my Telegram accounts today and went through them, and everywhere I looked, the Russians were advancing here, advancing there, took another city here, took another village there. There's no place on the battlefield where the Russians were retreating. The Russians are advancing. They destroyed another Ukrainian brigade that the Ukrainians can't replace. That's one thing Zelensky didn't talk about. All this equipment he gave them, where are the men? You don't have any men left. And the other Russians, in addition to saying the battlefield will dramatically change, they believe that the politics of this war dramatically changes by the end of summer, early fall. And when you say the politics, that the war is over. That basically Ukraine will have to agree to unconditional surrender, and that the Russians, as part of the terms of the stopping this, will denazify. That means get rid of the Zelensky regime, send him to his mansion in Miami, and also demilitarize. There will be no more Ukrainian army. There will be a Ukrainian government that the Russians approve of, and that's that. Now, will this money that they just received delay this a little bit? It could. I mean, it doesn't matter how you put it. With $13.8 billion is $13.8 billion. That's a lot of money. You can buy a lot of stuff. It can create a lot of hate and destruction. But it's not enough to turn the tide of this war. The Russians have superiority or supremacy across the battlefield, and the tragedy is that the Ukrainians are dying at a rate that approximates about 1,000 guys a day. In Vietnam, the war that broke America's back, at the height of the Vietnamese War, we were losing 200 guys a week, and that broke our back. 200 body bags coming home in a week. It killed us. Ukrainians are burying 1,000 guys a day. again, I asked the Americans who gave the money over there, why? Because all you did is guarantee more dead Ukrainians. The Russians right now have the lowest casualty rate than at any time in the war. All those people out there saying the whole purpose is to kill Russians, understand this. We don't kill that many Russians anymore. Oh, yes, Russians die. There's no doubt about it. Yes, there's videos out there that show the Russians dying. But they're not dying 1,000 a day. You know, the Russians might be losing 30 to 50 a day. Still a lot, because let's say it's 50 a day. 7 days, that's 350 body bags a week. That's 150 more than the 200 that broke the back of America in Vietnam. So the Russian people are burying 350 of their boys a week. That's a lot over time. But their spirit is unmatched. Their spirit is unbroken. And the Ukrainians, on the other hand, they can't get anybody to join. They have to go out and kidnap people to join their military. So it is what it is.
What a mess. I want to pivot into Israel and Iran. So I know the last time you met, or the last time like you were on the show, tensions haven't escalated to the point that it is now. Like now, Iran is involved. Obviously, we can start from the beginning where Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus. So obviously, Iran responded to that attack, and then now, Israel has responded to Iran. We are now basically seeing what could be a full-scale war in the Middle East. It's no longer just about Israel and Gaza, and this is something that I was afraid of. This is why a lot of us were calling for a ceasefire, not just in reference to what's happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank, but also because we knew that this could escalate to another level here. What do you predict is going to happen going forward? Because a lot of us are aware that Iran does have powerful weapons, and we continue to hear the State Department and people like Antony Blinken say the same rhetoric over and over that Israel has a right to defend itself. It's funny that Israel does, but nobody else does. You notice that? No one else does. But what do you think is going to happen here? Because I'm looking at it as though now there is conflict between Israel and Iran, not just Israel and Gaza. And then I'm thinking about all of the other neighboring countries, right? Because Israel has also attacked Syria and Lebanon. And then you have countries like Jordan and Egypt that are also in the mix here, but they don't seem to want to really get involved. What do you think is going to happen next? And what does this really mean for Israel in the long term, in the grand scheme of things?
Well, prior to this whole exchange, Israel enjoyed what I would call deterrence superiority. And what that means is Israel could do whatever it wanted to do and pay no consequence. It was backed up diplomatically by the United States, and it was backed up by the impression that the Israeli military would bring more harm to any nation attacking Israel than that nation would bring to Israel, tenfold. And so everybody's a little bit afraid. And Israel got away with literal murder. They assassinated Iranian scientists in Tehran. They blew up Iranian nuclear infrastructure inside Iran using covert means. They bombed Iranian positions in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, killing Iranian personnel. And Iran did nothing because the feeling, I think, in the Iranians were that if they responded, Israel would attack Iran and this would get them in a war that they didn't want. But then Israel attacked the consulate. And that was a bridge too far. That was a red line because the consulate, they didn't just kill some senior Iranians. They attacked Iranian soil. By law, by international law, that consulate is the soil of Iran. And the Iranians said, you can't do that. That's our red line. So they had to retaliate, and they did. This is the scary part because that retaliation could have been, because in order to, if you're going to respond, what you're trying to do is reset deterrence theory. What you're trying to do in responding is put the Israelis on notice that if you ever repeat what you just did, the pain is going to be so great you're going to regret it instantly. So you have to attack with enough force to make that point, but you don't want to overdo it so that the Israelis feel compelled to hit back with everything they have. Escalation management. The Iranians did this perfectly. First of all, they coordinated with the United States. And they told the United States, stay out of this. And the U.S. said, okay, we will stay out of it. If some of the reports are true, the United States gave Iran permission to attack Israel. saying you can attack as long as you don't attack civilians. The Iranians went, don't worry, we got you on this one. 72 hours notice the Iranians gave the United States and Israel that they were going to attack. That allowed Israel and the United States to build all their defenses up. And then they launched the attack in a very aggressive way, no secret middle of the morning. When they launched it, they televised the drones going off. And these are very loud drones. So the Israelis had a further 5 to 6 hours waiting for the drones to come to get their defenses in order. And then they televised the launch of the cruise missiles. Then they announced the launch of the ballistic missiles. So the Iranians were doing everything to tell the Israelis, and here comes the next punch, except for the last punch. The last punch was 9 modern Iranian missiles. All 9 of these hit their target. None were shot down. And that was the point the Iranians were trying to make. They were saying, look, you got this defense here. It's all up and running. And we're letting you save face by shooting down drones and everything. But the 9 missiles that you can't shoot down, we sent them out. Yeah, we didn't kill people. We avoided civilians. We blew up a runway. We blew up empty warehouses and all that kind of stuff. But look where we hit. You know that's exactly where we wanted to hit. And had we adjusted it just a little bit, we could have taken out your command center. We could have taken out your F-35s. We could have taken out your ammunition, your fuel. But we chose not to. We chose to blow up empty buildings. But we penetrated the most heavily defended place on Earth when it comes to anti-ballistic missiles. And that's the signal they sent to the Israelis. So now the Israelis are sitting there enraged because nobody's ever attacked them like that since 1991 when Saddam Hussein fired missiles in there. Enraged, and they've got to do something. But America, first of all, said, we're not going to war against Iran on this one. You're on your own. You blew up their consulate. This is on you. And then the Israelis went, but if we start a fight with the Iranians and the Americans aren't there, we may not win this fight. But we have to retaliate. We have to do something. And so it looks like they did a combination of two things. One, they had assets inside Iran that they've used in the past to assassinate scientists, blow up buildings, things of that nature. Release a handful of drones that flew towards an air base and a radar installation, and the Iranians shot these drones down. And that's what the Iranians announced, the drones. Then the Israelis brought in 2 aircraft that flew through Syria into Iraq, and they launched, I think, 2 to 4 Rampage missiles, which is a supersonic, hypersonic missile fired from the aircraft. And these flew in, and these hit 4 targets inside Iran. We don't know what the targets are. Apparently, they weren't that important. They may have been in the desert, just in a pattern. Who knows? But they sent a signal to the Iranians. You couldn't stop this. So we hit you with what we had. You couldn't stop it either. And what the Iranians did is they had said before, if Israel attacks, that immediately they're going to hit back with everything. But instead, the Iranians never talked about the 2 airplanes and the 4 missiles. They talked about the drones that came from inside. And then they said nothing happened. There was no defeat. So the Iranians immediately poo-pooed this story. And even the supreme leader, when he's given an interview, when they talked about hitting the Israelis, said, we're not here to talk about numbers of drones shot down and things like that. That's in the past. We don't want to talk about that anymore. I think both Israel and Iran have said we're not allowing this thing to go any further. We both made our points, and we dodged a bullet. We don't need this larger war, and we're going to stay focused on what we were doing. Israel's going to continue committing genocide in Gaza, and the Iranians are going to continue supporting the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, the militias, the Houthi, and they're not going to let this thing spin out of control. So I think we dodged a big bullet, and I think we're actually in a safer place today than we were back when Israel attacked the consulate. Back then, there was a real possibility of, a retaliation turning into a general war. But because of the wisdom of the Iranians, and to some extent the ability of the Israelis to, for once in their life, do the right thing and not escalate, we avoided a major war that would have been devastating for everybody. So this is one of the few times where I feel actually halfway decent about the outcome.
Well, I just wanted to add something that you mentioned there about how Iran made strategic attacks. that just goes to show you that Israel also could have made strategic attacks, but they chose not to, right? So they chose to purposely. That's another thing that people, I think we got to point out, guys, when Israel says we're doing our best to target Hamas. Obviously, we know that's not true, but it just goes to show you Iran showed that example. And it also showed that if we wanted to get through the Iron Dome, we can.
Yes.
So I think that seems like...
Well, it is, but it's more than just the Iron Dome. I mean, understand that the Iron Dome is a U.S.-Israeli system, meaning the Israelis didn't build it. We built it. We paid for it. We designed it. We tested it. It has an Israeli name, Arrow 1, Arrow 2, Iron Dome, David Sling. They're all Israeli missiles, but it was our money, our joint work. But we also overlaid it, our ballistic missile defense system, the THAAD missile with our radars, the Aegis-capable ships with their radars, their ships. All of this was plugged in. This was an American ballistic missile shield over Israel, the same ballistic missile shield that we protect South Korea and Japan with, we protect Europe with. And the Iranians penetrated it, sent 9 missiles all the way through. And now the North Koreans are going, wait a minute, your hypersonics got through? We just tested a hypersonic. You mean our missiles are going to get through too? The Americans don't have a defense against us. And the Russians have been saying that all along, but now they know it. They're going, so our Kinzhal and Zircon missiles, you guys can't touch them. And Europe and NATO is going, we can't touch those missiles. The South Koreans and Japanese are going, we can't touch those missiles. The Taiwanese are saying, we can't touch the Chinese missiles. What the Iranians just did is invalidate over $100 billion worth of anti-ballistic missile defense expenditures because they showed that whatever defenses are out there today, they can't stop a hypersonic missile.
It is very eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people. One of the things I wanted to bring up, too, is that obviously you're paying attention to what's happening across the United States right now. You know, multiple college students have decided to protest again in reference to the war in Gaza, but also like setting up the encampments. All the videos that I saw when this started, the students were being peaceful. There are students also here protesting at MIT and Northeastern. Again, these are peaceful assemblies here that are happening. And in some of these cities, the police have been sent in. In New York City, it was actually the president of Columbia University that made the call for the NYPD to come in. I think we all know how the NYPD can be. But then the worst display of this that I've seen so far has been in Texas. And Governor Abbott actually called in the state troopers, and it says state troopers deployed to smash hundreds of Palestine protesters in Texas right now as the student resistance spreads to UT Austin. I want to get your take on this. I'm going to play this like a 90-second vid, and I want you to look at this, Scott. The police showed up in riot gear. In riot gear. These kids are just for everyone to see. Now, in my opinion, this is not necessary. These are kids. I mean, I know they're technically adults, but I still see them as kids. So this is ridiculous. This is over the top. There are also videos that I can't show in here because they're that violent, where I saw them attack journalists. I saw a police a trooper throw a journalist to the ground, and he had the camera in his hand. I saw professors being shoved to the ground and attacked. I also heard some of these officers repeating the same rhetoric that's coming from mainstream media, that they're all like Hitler, etc. This is really scary to me in reference to free speech and our First Amendment rights, but then also, what do you think this means for Israel? Because it was a couple months ago, there was an article that was released that Joe Biden was trying to basically warn Netanyahu that Israel is starting to lose support, not just from the young people, but just all across the world. And now we see like these college students, they are not willing to back down. And I'm very proud of them. And I think they, have the right idea here. But now it even shows you that even the police, who are often trained by the IDF in Israel, even the police, they're out here again fighting for Israel.
Yeah. No, first of all, like every American needs to go reacquaint themselves with what freedom of speech is and what freedom of assembly is. and understand the importance of student demonstrations as representing the moral compass of a nation. You know, civil rights. People demonstrate in favor of civil rights on campuses, anti-war in Vietnam, a war that today nobody can defend. And the students have every right to protest against genocide. They're not protesting against Jews. There's no violence against Jews. This is a manufactured argument. They're anti-Israel, and they are vocal. And if you're, I guess, a pro-Israeli Zionist, maybe you feel uncomfortable walking around a campus where people are calling out your cause. But there's been no violence. Nobody's beat up a Jew. Nobody's done anything to Jewish people. This is an absurdity. In America, where we value free speech, let's say that we disagree, because trust me, there's some protests on campus, and I just go, no, that ain't my cause. That's not going to happen. But all I do on that one is I smile and I turn away and I walk away. I say, that's your thing. I'm over here doing my thing. God bless you. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. You go, you do your thing, but I'm not part of it. I'm not supporting it. That's the way we're supposed to be. I mean, so if I go in New York City and there's something happening in the streets in New York City that I'm uncomfortable with, leave. First of all, nobody's threatening me. I've never been accosted in New York City when there's events going on that I'm not supportive of. I don't accost them. I believe everybody has a right to be who they are. I believe everybody has a right to express how they feel about themselves, and I support that 100%. I would never, ever, ever once in my life say shut that down. All I'm going to say is I don't want to be there. I'm uncomfortable. Okay, so respect that and let me go off in my little, old fat white man space and just let me be who I am. But but I would never try to shut that down, because America's about freedom of speech, about freedom of assembly. We used to let the KKK hold meetings, and it sickened me. But I was one of the people that said, we have to let them do it, because even though I hate their speech, even though I hate their cause, they have a right. I don't like it, but they have a right to speak. As long as they're not promoting violence and all that, they have a right to speak. And sometimes the best thing to do to destroy a cause is let them speak. Let them be who they are so people can see who they are. And I think there's a reason why the KKK is sort of like going away, hopefully. Because people have seen them for who they are. They say, I despise that. So if let's say I was pro-Israeli on this one. I'm not, but let's say I was. My strategy here would be to say, see who they are, listen to them, see what they're saying, and if I'm right, Americans should listen to that and go, yeah, we're not for that. We're not backing that. The problem with the Israelis is they're saying, listen to what they're saying. Americans go, oh, we're listening to it, and we're seeing it, and we're on some, and this is why they're shutting it down. This is why the U.S. government's coming in, because what's happening right now is there is a sea change in America. That the American conscience, the consciousness has been awoken and enraged by the genocide that's taking place against the Palestinian people, and we know who to blame. We know what names to call out, and we are calling out Israel, and we are calling out Zionism, and we are calling out AIPAC, and we are calling out their supporters in Congress who continue to send weapons while children are having their hands tied behind their back and shot and buried in mass graves. Yeah, we're calling it out, and it's scared the establishment, because this isn't just isolated. This is the country awakening. And student campuses, the student bodies they're relatively homogeneous across the country. They might have different letters on their jackets and all this, but students are students are students are students. And American students are waking up to what's going on, and they're waking up. And with them comes the communities, especially, say, more progressive parts of the communities. And that's Joe Biden's bailiwick. That's his voting base, and he's losing them, and it scares him. So he's trying to shut this thing down. If you don't think that these orders are coming out from the highest places, either at the state in Texas from Governor Abbott, because here we have a weird thing in America where Christian evangelicals, Christian Zionists, they call themselves, are very much pro-Israel because they believe in what is it?
The term they call it. It's the statement in the Bible that basically says that Jewish people have to be in the Holy Land in order for
Armageddon. For Armageddon to happen, and then but there's a term they use about where everybody goes up to heaven and then stay behind, and there's a whole series of books written about the people that didn't go to heaven, they stay behind. I guess I'd be one of those stay behind people, but who knows?
The
rapture. There you go. Thank you very much. I was struggling with that word. You'll find out, Sabrina, as you get older, you'll be struggling with words too. It's just like it's right there. It's right there. I can't get it. So I thank whoever came up with that. But the rapture. So we have a weird thing in the United States where we have progressives who are supporting Israel and we have conservatives who support Israel, and they're both scared to death because the base of population that they thought would be with them, they're disgusted by what they see. They're alarmed by what they see, this genocide, and so they're awakening. So they're shutting it down. I would ask everybody in your audience to look up Kent State and see what happened at Kent State, and ask yourself, do you want that to happen? And it wasn't just Kent State. And again, you're gonna have to forgive me, because at the same day there was another shooting at a black college for the same thing. The black students came out against the war, and the police and the cops came down and they shot people. But because it happened in the 60s and black people weren't considered to be quite the same as white people, the dead white people got on the front page of Life magazine, and not the dead black students. But there was two colleges at the same time where they had these anti-war things, and the police and the state troopers came out and shot them. That's the direction we're heading here, ladies and gentlemen. That's the direction we're heading. We're heading to where students are going to be killed on campus for speaking out against bad policy. That's not a death sentence.
And by the way, 3 of the students that were killed during the Kent State massacre were Jewish, by the way, for people who are not aware.
Right, and I think 2 of them weren't even part of the demonstration. They were just going to class. They were just basically, bam, bullet hits them, dead. Get the, I don't want to use bad language on your show, so I'm going to respect you. Get the cops off the campus. If the kids start burning things, look what they did in Vietnam. They took over presidents' offices. They took over things. It was a heck of a lot more interactive than it is right now. But it played itself out. Generally speaking, when people start talking to you and start acknowledging, give you a right to speak, it dissipates. But here they're afraid to engage, because how can you defend genocide? How can you defend it? You can't defend it. It's indefensible. So rather than just say we're wrong, they say bring in the cops. And I'm telling you right now, I am very afraid, because this isn't going away. It's blowing up on campuses all over the country. All the students are starting to rally around the cause, and I'm just really concerned that some stupid governor is going to call in the National Guard, these guys who were trained to go murder Iraq. I'm sorry, National Guard, but you lost my respect. You guys, bombed wedding parties in Afghanistan. You kicked down doors, terrorized Iraqi families. You weren't over there defending democracy, defending freedom. You did some really bad stuff, and you guys know you did some really bad stuff. And now you've come back here with that skill set, that antisocial behavior that's ingrained in you are, and then we're going to put you on a college campus and give you guns and ammunition and put you up against our students? Hell no. It can't happen, but it's going to. And we'll be playing Crosby, Still, Nash & Young, Ohio all over again.
Yeah, I think some people may not realize that, but when they call in the National Guard, that's not to make peace. That's actually to take action and to escalate the situation. I can see Ron DeSantis doing that, Scott.
I can see DeSantis. I can see Abbott doing it. And the thing about it, too, is that, like at Kent State, what they acknowledged is that the National Guard guys, they were scared themselves. They weren't well trained. And so, the only thing more dangerous than a scared cop with a gun is a scared National Guardsman with a gun. Because the scared National Guardsman's gun is more powerful, can do a lot more damage. This is a bad day for America. I mean, sometimes we have to suffer as a nation to learn and to improve. But, man, the suffering hurts. The suffering's bad. And I'm just afraid that in order to turn the corner on this issue, there may be some tragedy attached to it. And I hope not, and I hope that we can get enough people to, weigh in on this. Why are you, did you see the one, she was an economy professor, and one of her students was being beaten up by the cops. And all she did is said, why are you doing this to him? She didn't touch a cop. She wasn't anywhere near a cop. And then this stupid burly guy came in, arrested her, and then they George Floyd her.
Yep.
Put her on the ground and put the knee on her neck. And I'm like, you guys haven't learned a damn thing. First of all, she's a female economy professor. She's not carrying anything. Why are you using this force on her? Why are you treating her like, this is why, and they were sergeants. They wore sergeant stripes, so they should know better. Cops don't know better. Cops are trained to do one thing, beat people up and shoot people. We don't have smart cops anymore. I'm sure somewhere in some town they're going to say, I live in Bethlehem, New York. We have some smart cops. Want to know why? Because our community makes them be smart. Our community actually holds them to account when they do things. When I was a firefighter, I'd respond in the ambulance to DUI calls. And, man, you never saw more respectful cops in your life when they pulled over some DUI people, because that was a citizen. And even though they were going to get arrested, and even though they were going to get fingerprinted, and even though they were going to get, man, it was the most polite thing in the world, kid gloves, all this kind of stuff, because the community holds them to account. But I also saw them treat people who weren't of the community. I don't know, like the black kid walking over from Albany across the Delaware Avenue Bridge into all-white Delmar and being pulled over by a cop saying, what are you doing in Delmar? What do you mean? It's America. Delmar isn't your own city. I'm an American citizen walking in America. Yeah, but you don't belong here. What do you mean I don't belong here? You're talking back to me, boy. Bam, 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 bam. And next thing you know, you got a beat-up black kid in the lockup. Yeah, Bethlehem cops could be that bad too. But our cops aren't well trained, especially when it comes to use of force. And a lot of them come from the military, where they've been traumatized, where they've been conditioned to do really bad things. Word of advice to all city planners out there: in your police department, never give a veteran's preference again. The fact is, make military service automatically disqualifying. If you ever served in the military, you can never be a cop in America, because cops aren't supposed to think like you've been trained to think. Cops are supposed to think differently. The American people aren't the enemy. You're not going out on patrol against the enemy. You're not driving through hostile territory. You're driving through somebody's neighborhood. You're driving through a hometown populated by American citizens whom you're supposed to protect. But that's not the thinking. They come out, they think they're back in Baghdad. They think they're back in Kabul. They're going out on patrol. They're gearing up. There's the enemy out there. I'm going to get these guys. And they do. And now they're going on college campuses and taking down students whose job it is to challenge everything. That's what a college kid's supposed to do. Go there and challenge everything. You want to teach people to be critical thinkers. You should be applauding them for what they're doing. Applauding them. It's a learning experience to sit there and say, I'm challenged. And man, how do you get a civic-minded? There's so many Americans just unplugged from civil life. Go out and you get your job, you go to work, you come home, and you just don't care about what's going on. You've unplugged because you're overworked and all that stuff. These kids are out there, they're engaged. They're doing what American citizens should be doing, engaging, holding people to account. That's what America's about. And we're sending in cops to beat them up. And soon we're going to send in the National Guard to shoot them.
And the other thing I want to say with this particular population, this is the population or the age group that is typically recruited by the military, and military recruitment is down in the United States. That's another thing I think that, it's very different than when you joined, than when my dad joined. Like now, people have a very different mindset about joining the military. And I want to ask your question about that, and then one more after this one, which is, what do you think about the statement that Joe Biden made a couple of days ago that they may have to send in U.S. troops into Israel? How do you feel about that? And considering that military recruitment has decreased, do you have this any insight or any intuition that the U.S. government could possibly implement the draft again?
I don't know if the American people are so so zombified as to tolerate a draft when there's not a need. Let's put it this way. If Russia or China attacked us today, I don't think you'd have to have a draft. I think every American would go out and volunteer to defend their country. If people are coming across the border doing harm to the American people, we'd be there because we love our country. But the military has been destroyed in terms of being seen as the American people as a viable institution of American values, because all we do is invade countries. All we do is kill people. We go overseas, and it's not about improving life here at home. It's about bullying people, imposing our will. It's not even about fighting terrorism, we found out, because, we're not killing terrorists. We're just killing innocent men and, women and children who are in their home in a village in a land that we don't understand culturally. We don't speak the language. We view them as the enemy because they view us as the occupier because we are the occupier. And so it's very difficult right now. And also it's about motivation. I would imagine if your father is roughly my age, that he joined for patriotic reasons. That he got up one morning and said, I'm going to serve my country. I'm serving America. Now, it's also employment. You get a paycheck, but you don't get a big paycheck. I didn't get a big paycheck. You got paid so you could. But I joined to serve my country. I put myself at the service of my nation, and that's a whole different mindset than saying I'm unemployed. I have no other options. Okay, I'm going to go in the military, and I'm going to get 3 hots and a cot, and maybe a GI Bill so I can go to college when this is done. But you're not joining, because you want to be in the military. You're joining because you have no other options. That's the option of last resort. And the level of motivation for those, and you're joining in hopes that you don't get deployed. Whereas when I joined, I know, Sabrina, you're going to get angry at me. I prayed for war every single second. I prayed. Get him off the air! He's a bastard. But I joined, and I was trained to a certain skill set, and I'm like, let me do it. Let me do it. Let me do what I'm trained to do. Let me do. Today, I'm a different thing. Like, I'd like to imagine people joining the military, becoming the best trained people in the world, and never using it. Wouldn't that be nice? But back then, I was, until I went to war, I wanted to go to war. And once I went to war, I never wanted to go to war again, because you quickly learn that it ain't what it's not what Hollywood says it is. But the mindset was leaning forward. Today, if you're leaning forward, I'm afraid of the people that are leaning forward, because we've also lowered the standards. I actually had to go through some very serious, testing and psychological batteries and test after test after test after test, with doctors looking at you, checking boxes. You ever seen that movie, The Right Stuff? You know how the astronauts were getting tested before they went up the Mercury? That's what it felt like in the early 1980s, going into the Marine Corps Officer Commissioning Program, just testing, just winnowing people out so that the only people left were people that met the standard that you wanted. Today, we don't do any of that. Basically, if you got a pulse, you're in. And now if you got people leaning forward wanting to kill, why? To serve your country? To fight the enemy? Or are you just a psychopath who wants to go and kill people? And I'm concerned right now that a lot of the people that are leaning forward saying they want to go kill are just psychopaths. And then the beauty of it is, when they leave the military, they join the police.
Yep.
Now they're psychopaths leaning in, wanting to kill the enemy, which is the American people. But no, there's a reason why the U.S. Army is having a recruiting problem, because there's a lack of motivation. I think the only branch that's not having a recruiting problem right now is the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps still puts itself up as a higher standard. We don't lower our standards. So when you want to join the Marines, you know you're getting them. But even the Marine Corps has changed fundamentally. I heard they have yellow cards for timeouts. I mean, I couldn't imagine. Timeout. Can't yell at me anymore. I got a timeout card. Man, if I pulled a timeout card back then, boom, 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 kick me to the ground, beat me up. Timeout, yeah. No, but I'm not saying that that's the right way to train. I'm just saying that was the way they trained us back then, was a lot of hands-on love. But not today. A timeout card and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's better, but the military today is not the military of the past. Different levels of motivation. A lot of it is based upon the concept of a job, not an adventure, a paycheck, and the kind of things that you'd be asked to do in war is an inconvenience. And now imagine taking this army, this military, and telling them, you're not going to Iraq where you get to kick down doors and, kill civilians. We're sending you to Ukraine where we're going to lose 3,000 guys in 4 days. And you said, but sir, our unit's only 5,000 strong. Welcome to the real war, buddy. You're all going to die. And can you imagine them back then going, because I have to tell you, when we were trained to fight the Soviets, I was the intelligence officer, and I would tell my guys, if we go up against the Soviets, we're all going to die. That's just the way it is. They got a bigger army, more artillery, and, in the end, we're going to die. And the Marines are like, all right, but we'll take some out before we go down. We'll make this a fight. Today, I can't imagine people going, oh, okay, we'll make a fight about it. There we go. What about my college education? I signed up for the college degree program, and I'm going to die. You can't kill me. And I wasn't in order to pay my bills, I got a second job at Home Depot on the weekends. And if you send me off to war, how am I going to have that second job? You're not supposed to have a second job. You're in the military. But then I can't afford the car payment on the Camaro I bought. I think the motivation today, and I know there's going to be a lot of people that are mad at me because they did join up for patriotic reasons. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I'm saying that of the majority of American soldiers out there today, that motivation's not there. And there's a reason why the U.S. Army was 15,000 short on their recruiting goal last year, because nobody wants to join the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force today.
You're right. One more question for you, Scott. What if we could have an even bigger movement? What if we could take, this movement here, the pro-Palestine movement, minus the police, if we could take all of those kids at the college campuses and everybody else that's out in the street, marching for the Palestinian people, and then we could also take all the people that are tired of this war in Ukraine, right? This is where I would push on people that are part of the Freedom Caucus, that people like MTG, who's tired of all this money going to Ukraine, to mobilize people within her own district, her own constituency, and get them out in the streets. What if we had a group of people that were against the war in Ukraine actually merged with the people who were against the war in Gaza? That could actually probably get us to that 5%, which they say you need to have like a massive movement in this country. What would you think about something like that? And then it would just be a big anti-war movement.
I told you that I went to Russia back in May. That was part of a campaign. I actually spoke at a restaurant in New York City in December of 2022. And at the time, I was very worried about nuclear war. I just wrote a book about my time as a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, getting rid of nuclear weapons, and I took a look at what was going on and, how we're actually starting to emphasize nuclear weapons and stuff. And so in there, I said, in the treaty that I was part of, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, was signed by Ronald Reagan in December of 1987. Ronald Reagan was a staunch anti-communist. I mean, if you go and look at his record, he's no, tree-hugging, arms control kind of guy. He's the guy that made a joke, thought he was off campus about, well, Orby, the missiles are flying. They'll be in your territory in 20 minutes or something like that. So he joked about nuclear war. But he signed it. Why? In June of 1982, 1 million people took to the streets in Central Park in New York City. 1 million people from all over America. And they came together for one thing, and one thing only: to say no to nuclear war. To say no to nuclear war. And that voice, what they did, woke up the political possibilities. It took a guy like Ronald Reagan, who said, my people want me to think about nuclear disarmament. And 5 years later, he signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It began a process that led to this arch-conservative guy signing a treaty that got rid of nuclear weapons. I mentioned that at the time, and I I said, we need to do that again. In June of 2024, on the eve of presidential elections, we need 1 million people in the streets of Central Park protesting against nuclear war. Not against, protesting for disarmament. I'm tired of the protesting against things. What are we here for? We're here for nuclear disarmament. We're here for peace. We're here, for, peaceful coexistence. And I went out and I worked hard for that. There was a movement, the Rage Against the War Machine rally in February, and they were supposed to bring everybody together. And the problem is you can't bring everybody together. At least it hasn't been shown. Most of the classic peace movements avoided that rally because they said, well, no, that's not what we're about. Within that rally, people came in from different political spectrums and they started fighting against one another, and the rally wasn't nearly as effective, and they had to postpone the second one because it fizzled out. Sabrina, we need this. We have to have this. If we can't put 1 million people in Central Park, we're never going to achieve anything. If we can't put 1 million people in Washington, D.C., surrounding the Lincoln Memorial, going down the mall towards Congress, pack that with 1 million people. If we can't replicate what Martin Luther King was able to do for the civil rights movement, then we're not going to be able to save it. What do I think about it? We have to do it. But how? How's the question? How do we get people to put aside their petty differences? Because at the end of the day, I don't care if you're a libertarian. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a communist. I don't care any of that stuff. All I care about is that you are pro-disarmament or pro-peace. And if we can come together as Americans and say we've put aside our petty differences, we're now working together, like the American citizens we should be, yeah, we could do this. But how do we do it? I mean, I have to tell you, I'm demoralized by this because I thought for sure I could get the American public to wake up about nuclear war. Nobody takes it seriously. And when they do talk about it, they're like, yeah, we can win that. No, you can't. You can't win nuclear war. We learned that one. When I grew up, we learned you can't win nuclear war. That's why getting rid of nuclear weapons was a good thing. War is bad. How do we tell people war is bad? When I grew up, there was enough survivors of World War II who would just sit there and go, yeah, war's pretty bad. We're with you. There was enough Vietnam vet guys who were still, limber enough to be out there. War's bad. War's bad. Today, we have a bunch of, disgruntled global war on terrorism guys. Some of them are saying war is bad, but most of them are just like, man, let's go out there and kill more terrorists. Let's go out and do this. So the military's not, the military's not on our side. The military's not saying, yeah, man, we don't need to be doing that. How do we do it, Sabrina? There's the ultimate challenge. I mean, I'm with you. I tell you what, if you and I and others could get Danny Haifong, if we could get Max Blumenthal, we can get Aaron Mate, we can get all these people and their respective audiences together. If we could put 1 million people in New York City, in Central Park, if we could put 1 million people in the mall, if we could put 1 million people in San Francisco, this is a nation of 320, 330 million people. If we can get enough people mobilized just to say, we believe in peace, give peace a chance, we could do something. But how do we get 1 million people to do that? How do we get them to wake up one day and say, I want to go to, again, I bring back the 60s songs with Joni Mitchell. By the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong. That's just people walking, baby. All we have to do is get people one day to say, I'm going to New York City. I'm going to Central Park. I'm going to Washington, D.C. And, if we can get the permits, we get the permits. If not, flood the damn city anyways. Just flood it. Shut it down. Didn't they was there this thing they called a flash mob? Like you put it on the phone, but people show up, a flash mob. Let's flash mob Washington, D.C. Let's flash mob Central Park. Doesn't need a permit. We're just going to say, I want everybody in this area to show up on this day and just stand there and make a point. Stand there and make a point. We're shutting the city down. We're making a point for peace. Do it to Washington, D.C. Do it to San Francisco. Shut it down. Shut her down. Can we do it? I'd like to believe we could. I don't know. Maybe you have better ideas. I'm not, me and my flash mob idea. Who knows? That's probably the dumbest idea in the world. But come up with a better idea.
No, I think these are all really good points. I mean, even during the civil rights movement, they didn't have a lot of the resources that we do have. There was no internet, there was no Twitter, no Facebook or anything like that. They were able to mobilize simply by calling people on the phone, and getting thousands of people out in the street. And so I think it's just, yeah, I totally hear you. I totally hear you. Well, Scott, thank you so much. Anything coming up that people should know about?
Nope, just a trip. We're going to make a documentary about it. It's going to be a pretty cool documentary. And so later on, we're going to start putting out requests for support because documentaries don't make themselves. And even though we're going to go over there and we're going to capture it on film, there's these creatures called film editors, and they charge a lot of money, and then the guys who do the music charge money. And so we will be putting out appeals for support on that. But I think it's a worthy cause. And like I said, this is going to be a cool trip. This is going to be one of these feel-good trips where when you come back, you're going to say, I actually made a difference because we are going to have an actual impact on people's lives. We're going to bring people together. We're going to try and tear down walls of ignorance, walls of fear, and bring people together and begin this dialogue and this communications that is absolutely necessary for Americans and Russians to relearn how to live in peace and harmony.
All right, Scott Ritter, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.